As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
What do we have on the casualty numbers out of Gaza so far?
So the numbers coming out, and they have slowly are stopped increasing so quickly in the past week or so, and it is 11,000 civilians total. 4,500 of those deaths are children. I believe the number is 40 journalists and over 100 UN employees, and so that's kind
what
of the
about
breakdown.
fighters?
I haven't seen a number on that. I also haven't seen a number on the total number of Hamas killed on October 7th either.
Yeah. Well, I sure would like to know if they've killed any Hamas guys in all of their bombing of the Gaza Strip. I'm sorry for laughing. It's just the absurdity of that thing. I'm sure somebody must have been engaged at point-blank range there in the fight in North Gaza. But, I mean, in the bombing campaign for all these weeks and weeks and weeks where we all know, we meaning all of humanity on this planet, know that Hamas is buried deep underground, mostly safe from Israeli strikes on the people above. So, I mean, do you have any sense that, well, there's a cover-up? Sometimes they do kill Hamas fighters, but they're just classified as civilians? Or, no, really, nobody's seen any Hamas fighters around here. These are all civilians being, having their corpses pulled out of the rubble here.
Yeah, so a couple weeks ago, the Washington Post, I believe, reported that while Israel had carried out an extensive bombing campaign to Gaza, they hadn't hurt the middle or upper ranks of Hamas. Now, as far as, foot soldiers of Hamas are people in Gaza who are employed by Hamas to do various things, because they are the, as you say, the wardens of the prison, so they do assign other jobs other than military ones. And then one of the things, I guess, on the fighter point, Scott, I think why we probably don't have a number, especially when we're talking about the Israeli forces coming in and engaging with Hamas, is that the 11,000 number that's being counted are bodies that have gone to hospitals in Gaza, morgues in Gaza, or I guess turned up at other like official agencies like UN shelters or something like that, and then were buried. And so if somebody was killed engaging with Israeli forces, their body probably wouldn't have turned up in area that is still populated with Palestinians, and so it's not going to be counted as a part of that 11,000 number. And in fact, the Israeli bombing of and attacks on Palestinian hospitals in Gaza at this point have really slowed the release of these numbers. Communications have almost been completely cut. I believe the guy who is coordinating the number is at the Al-Shifa hospital that's currently besieged by the Israeli forces. And as of today, I believe there's actually Israeli forces on the grounds and in the building of those hospitals and telling the doctors to stay away from the windows or they're going to be shot. So I think it's unlikely we're going to get an update on the death toll in the next couple of days at least.
Yeah. All right. So talk to me about what's happening at the Al-Shifa hospital there in Gaza. Did they find terror tunnels full of weapons?
Not so far, not that I've seen. All the evidence that I've seen put out by Israel, people have used the Google Find Image and have shown that a lot of these are from old pictures from 2012, 2014 in the past when Israel's carried out operations into Gaza. And so nothing to show anything current. It's so hard to get good information and any kind of confirmed information coming out, particularly at the Al-Shifa hospital, because communications have been almost completely cut. Doctors Without Borders will put out a statement every day or two when they get a hold of one of their doctors that's in the hospital, and or the UN or another agency will. But that's really all the communications we're getting. And a part of the reason is that people are not being allowed to leave. The doctors are reporting that anybody who's tried to leave, ambulances that have tried to leave and retrieve wounded civilians that are outside of the gates of the hospital have been fired on and killed. So there's no option. And in fact, yesterday, because about 180 bodies are decomposing in the hospital, they had opened up a mass grave on the grounds, and they apparently buried those people last night or today.
I mean, this is why they can bomb these places, is because there are no civilians really, or even if they are civilians, there's always a Hamas terrorist hiding behind them or below them. And of course, it goes without saying then that all those human shields' lives are forfeit, and Israel can kill as many civilians as they want to. And meanwhile, where's Hamas? And, they're always just begging the question and arguing past the sale, whatever. Hey, sometimes civilians get killed, but obviously Israel isn't targeting them. They're just happening to get killed when Israel is only targeting bad guys. But who says so?
Right. And obviously, apply this to any human condition where, say, a bank robber runs into somebody's house. The police don't get to line up a tank and just blow your house away because, a dangerous robber was in there, Scott. So, we had to make sure he didn't get out and kill more people. So we killed all of you.
It's Anti-War Radio. I'm talking with Kyle Anzalone. And let me ask you, Kyle, what is this thing in the Wall Street Journal where they're saying, hey, America, you should take the Gazans so that we can have Gaza? It's unbelievable, man.
Yeah, so two members of the Israeli Knesset wrote an op-ed for the Wall Street Journal arguing Western countries should take in refugees from Gaza as Israeli officials to continue to call for Palestinians to be pushed out of the enclave. We've actually had in the past couple of days, I believe, the agricultural minister in Israel call for or say that this campaign was going to be Nakba 2023, which is kind of fascinating because I don't think Israel officially recognizes the Nakba, and you're not supposed to mention it. And of course, that is referring to the 1948 ethnic cleansing of what was then Palestine and moving all the Palestinians to the West Bank or Gaza Strip. So what they're talking about is, finishing that for Gaza and kicking all the Palestinians out there.
Here's Gerald Salenti with today's trends in the news.
And on the market front, not today, the Dow is down a little bit, but things are still pretty positive. Let's see, the 30-day stock index slipped, but Walmart slid 8% after the world's largest retailer issued a lower than expected forecast for the year. The largest retailer. That's how the country's been fucking sold out, man. The bigs own everything because you got a bunch of fucking scumbags, your political leaders who sold this country out. Peru recession deepens as economy shrinks more than forecast. Japan's economy shrank at the fastest annualized quarterly pace in 2 years. You ready? The Japanese yen is at its languishing near its lowest in more than a decade. Danish economy slips into recession. European labor market weakens as economy falters. After a year of near zero economic growth, job creation is slowing, and surveys suggest more businesses are preparing to lay off workers. Every week in your Trends Journal, I think this is the 63rd or 64th week that we've been doing it. We put the amount of layoffs going around the world. I'm mentioning all this because the equity markets are going up. Oh, but oil prices are going down. Danish economy slips into recession. Germany's GDP contracted 0.1%. They're in recession. Japan's economy sank at the fastest annualized quarterly pace in 2 years. Peru. We can keep going on here. So why the equity market's going up? And again, go back to they're going to be lowering interest rates. Germany's unemployment rate climbed by 0.8%, the highest level since 2017. Retail sales declined for the first time in the United States since March. This is important. Burberry shares shrank 9% as luxury spending slowdown bites. We've been reporting week after week after week of the declines from the big luxury brands. Very, very important. So it's not the plantation workers of Slavelandia that can't afford to buy stuff. It's the people with dough that are cutting back too, because they got less dough out there. 80% of American households are in a worse financial position now than they were before the COVID, they call it pandemic, the COVID war, brought to you by fucking scumbags that's closed down society, making up fucking shit. Again, going back to the cover, that the leaders, you follow your leaders, you do what you're told, you're nothing more than a piece of shit. So 80% of American households are in a worse financial position now than they were before COVID pandemic hit. This is the Federal Reserve, all right? 80%. Going back, they're going to lower interest rates because things going down. It's going to go down. And now on to the Israel war. Israel raided Gaza Schiff hospital. Great. Could you imagine if the Russians kept attacking hospitals, schools, and shelters in Ukraine that the Israelis are doing in Gaza? Could you imagine if the people in Gaza were Jewish and Palestinians were bombing them? Oh my God, the outrage. Again, as I mentioned, that little fucking prick who calls himself a Christian, a little fucking prick, and I call it to his face, little scumbag House Speaker. He is a House Speaker, a speaker of shit from a house full of shit, a house full of shit called Congress. Fucking shitheads. This is the motherfucker. I got to be proper. A shitiot. Yep. Politician. Full of shit idiot. That calls himself a devout Christian. Oh, and is he opposed to abortion? Oh, no, you're killing a baby that hasn't been born but is alive. Yeah, but here's more money to keep slaughtering the Palestinians. This little fuckface at the rally that got all the coverage from all the major media, front page, that they had in D.C. that was pro-Israel. Again, I said this and I'm going to keep saying it again. He said, a ceasefire is outrageous. Johnson called the idea outrageous, prompting a chant of no ceasefire from the crowd. Isn't that nice? The whole country's going down to crap in front of our place, in front of our face. And you know why? Because we have crap heads in charge. And by the way, I no longer support RFK Jr. I was the first. All the facts are there. The email, all the videos are there. My interviews with other people are there, going back to last December, saying that he would be the best candidate because I thought he was anti-war. But he's pro-Israel murder. And again, I am of the belief that there should be no state of Israel. Again, it was invented with the Balfour Declaration, and then the United Nations decided they should have it in 1948. Who the fuck are they to decide this and throw the people out? So I say, let's have a one-state solution. Make it equal for everybody and give the Palestinians back the land they stole them. And I did a great interview with Judge Napolitano yesterday. Please watch it. And you go to his site, Judging Freedom.
Generally speaking, what has happened to the freedom of speech?
I mean, generally what we saw is what we've been looking at is a kind of a suppression of speech coming from primarily at first the left to squelch all of the oppositional speech. And there has been, of course, numerous cases brought forth regarding free speech on social media and the internet. And, we saw with the Twitter files and, of course, Missouri versus Biden, that there has been incredible collusion between these big tech corporations and the state to utterly silence speech. And of course, I experienced the suppression of speech at NYU when I came out and critiqued social justice policies. They censored me very stringently and effectively denied my so-called academic freedom and free speech rights at the same time. So we're looking at a kind of regime that has worked to silence speech, but now we see that it's two-sided, that it depends on who is now being suppressed. And the state has an interest in suppressing anything that doesn't go along with official state narratives, whether that be speech coming from the so-called left or right. They are very acting as a uniparty where speech is concerned, effectively toggling back and forth between the right and the left to suppress the other side's speech.
Let's talk about the government attempting to do indirectly what it can't do directly with respect to speech. I mean, theoretically, the government cannot infringe upon the content of speech. It could interfere with time, place, and manner. You can't take a bullhorn and have a political demonstration at 3:00 in the morning in a residential neighborhood. I get it.
Right.
But when the government doesn't like the content of speech, let's say on a particular website, and it goes to the website and uses a carrot or a stick, we'll reward you if you suppress this speech. We'll punish you if you don't suppress this speech. And then it's challenged. That seems to me to be a pretty clear-cut case of the government trying to conduct an end run around the First Amendment. A federal judge in Texas enjoined the government, the United States court, from even communicating with these social media platforms. The United States Court of Appeals for the Third Circuit upheld the injunction. The Supreme Court vacated the injunction while they hear the appeal.
Right.
In the meantime, the government can still use a carrot or a stick to get social media to interfere with speech in ways that the government would never be able to do. Put aside this de Blasio incident. It's an aberration.
Yeah.
Outrageous. It's unconstitutional. They paid you for the harm they caused you. But they're causing harm all over the country by using social media.
Yeah, they're using these government proxies in order to undertake censorship. And we saw that with Missouri versus Biden, in which you had the White House, the CDC, and the other agencies, the FBI, effectively calling and pestering and emailing social media outlets to censor COVID issues, COVID information, so-called disinformation, to censor even political speech about the 2020 election and regarding the Hunter Biden laptop. So this was, as you said, this has been, it's vacated while the Supreme Court considers this, I suppose. But there's still other types of proxies that are in operation. For example, at Stanford University, they have the Internet Observatory, who is paid by the federal government to effectively intervene in social media outlets and to censor speech, to flag certain speech as misinformation or disinformation. And they do this regarding election issues, and they're calling it election misinformation. So you cannot object to anything regarding elections because you have these hall monitors paid by the state to effectively shut you down. And they're coming out of so-called private institutions, but they're being paid by the state. So this is another infringement of the First Amendment directly. It's the government taking action through these proxies to shut down speech.
How dangerous are these times for civil liberties?
We're in very perilous times because, and the consequences of suppression of speech have never been greater, in the sense that we're dealing with a regime that is imposing very dangerous narratives and extremely pernicious policies. So in the case of COVID, for example, you had the suppression of so-called mis and disinformation, but it turns out a lot of this mis and disinformation was actually true, whereas the so-called the government's supposed information turned out to be very specious. So these are cases where free speech is absolutely required for the public to have knowledge and information. And, this also goes through the internet altogether. I mean, Google, for example, has been suppressing and blacklisting and downranking all kinds of information for years. And I would suggest, since they are under contract with the federal government and they were funded originally by the CIA's Incutel, that they are a state apparatus as well, and they are serving a state function of controlling narratives and actually curating reality for many people. So you can't get the kind of information that you would otherwise because it's been banished. So this is an unbelievable series of events. I call these proxies for the state governmentalities because they do government work. They're state apparatuses that are in effect suppressing and controlling narratives and, basically arbitrating what's permissible and making even the possibility of finding certain ideas or opinions or perspectives impossible. So that's a very, very perilous condition that we're under.
You're listening to Part of the Problem on the Gas Digital Network.
Yeah, it almost seems like Israel's got a bit of a strategic problem that it's hard to separate the wishes of the government or the people there from Netanyahu's own political interests, which it's seemingly like he's got a dead political career. Now, it could be that Netanyahu realizes that and he's going out with his last aggressive bang. And even though I don't think he's so noble to go, hey, I think that this is important and sure, I'll take the rap for it. I don't think that's what he's doing. It seems like maybe same as in the U.S., sometimes when you're in a war, it's easier to stay in power. So it could be that that's partly why he's being
I think
so
that's
aggressive.
a much more plausible explanation is that, it's there. I think Netanyahu was in serious political jeopardy before this latest round of the war started. And now this gives him some cover. But if the war's over, he might be back in that political jeopardy. So now it's got to be him versus the world and him. We're taking out, we're taking out all of Hamas, which is a totally unachievable, feat short of some truly horrific shit. And so, I think that's where we are right now, or at least that's the best guess. But it is just it's just sad, particularly for Jordan Peterson, because I do think he was a very positive figure at one point, but to just be totally swallowing the Israeli propaganda, seemingly adding no thought of his own to it, as he just kind of spews these lines about how Iran is 3 months away from a bomb. It's not like he's really it's not as if he really went through okay, well, here's what's going on with their nuclear capacity, and here's why I believe they're 3 months away. It's just that's my understanding. That's what I was told by some Israelis, so I guess that's true. And meanwhile,
he still throws in and that's bad.
Yeah, right.
He's still selling it.
I mean, just know it is exactly what he used to accuse all these campus leftists of doing, just kind of regurgitating the given propaganda without interacting with it in your own mind at all. And to come to the conclusion that this is, I mean, it's really amazing how war propaganda works on people, but to come to this conclusion that Israel's just right about everything. There's no moral question to be raised with how many kids they get to kill in Gaza. Is there a number? Is there a number where if you hit that number, you go, ugh, now I'm kind of rethinking whether this thing was worth it. It's just, nope, that's it. Iran did it. They're going to get a bomb. No evidence of any of this. Just kind of puts it out there. I don't know. It's wildly irresponsible as a public figure who has millions of followers to just be like delivering this war propaganda so mindlessly. It's truly disappointing.
What happened to him? He got addicted to the benzos, and someone from the deep state finally said, "Hey, listen, I can fix this for you."
Dude, your guess is as good as mine. I do not know. But somehow he became friends. You know, he started working on Ben Shapiro's network. He became friends with Netanyahu. And all of a sudden, this stuff that was never really in his wheelhouse before, was never really stuff he talked about, is now, you know, this is going to be, I guess, what he pretends his area of expertise is in. So, yeah, kind of sad. Bill Maher, on the other hand, has always been this way, has always been a total Israel supporter with no nuance at all.
Ramaswamy, why do you keep going at Nikki Haley? Why do you think this is going to be a
Chris, I don't know what you've been smoking, man. You and the rest of the mainstream media, it's laughable. Nikki Haley's been going after me the whole campaign. First debate, second debate. You know, she's been trailing me for much of the time, but I realize the establishment media has realized that there's a puppet they want to put up. I'm not playing that game. The grassroots of this country know they want a leader who isn't going to send us, our sons and daughters, to go die in foreign wars that racked up $7 trillion in debt. Dick Cheney 2.0 is taking over the GOP. The grassroots of this country know they want a leader who isn't going to send us, our sons and daughters, to go die in foreign wars that racked up $7 trillion in debt. Dick Cheney 2.0 is taking over the GOP. Problem is the Democratic establishment media is now rooting for war too. I'm the only candidate speaking for a true America First agenda on that debate stage, and I think we're going to be successful.
Vivek, how are you going to bring people together when you just put together a tapestry of conspiracies? You know that I'm not pitching anything about it. You don't even come on my show. You don't even come on my show. Hold on a second. I let you put it out there, and now I get to finish smoking, and now I get to answer, which is, this is what the media is doing. Is putting up Nikki Haley against me. They know I'm the real deal. Please, she hasn't even been on my show. I'm just watching you get slapped around by her, and I'm wondering what your strategy is.
The fact of the matter is, Chris, my strategy is calling out the mainstream media like I did to Kristen Welker at the start of that debate. I asked her about the Trump-Russia collusion hoax, told her to look the audience in the eye and apologize to them. Just like I'll tell you, you're part of the mainstream media despite pretending like you're not. Look the audience in the eye and tell them for all that happened.
I'm part of the mainstream media.
Hey, listen, and you play the same game that the rest of the mainstream media does. You've been complicating your brother. You have been playing the game. You've kicked off CNN.
Of course I help my brother.
Yeah, and you know what? That's been journalistic standards that have now been failed, not just by you, but by every member of the broken political media. So yes, it is going to
everyone in the media,
and you want to
everyone in the media is responsible for covering for my brother. See what I'm saying?
90% of the media is colluding with pushing one answer on the American public for the origin of COVID-19, which is the Hunter Biden laptop story.
What does
people decide they want to put up as their puppets.
What does any of that have to do?
All right. So I thought that was quite an interesting exchange. Rob, you wanna open up because there's a lot to respond to there.
I have so much to say. I don't want to overstep here, but it's fantastic how antagonizing Cuomo is being. They keep trying to reframe it as if Vivek is losing in his skirmishes with Nikki Haley. The New York Post tried to pull the same move, and it might be one of the most glorious campaign things I've ever seen of someone actually just going, you are profiting off these words and speaking that directly and taking the moral high ground, which is there. It's like what you used to say with Donald Trump of that there's cards on the table and other people are just folding pocket rockets, and he's actually going, oh, I'll play these cards. It's
literally, it's because there's pocket aces here, and everyone else is like, we agreed we wouldn't play those cards. You're like, I'll play these cards. They're really good cards.
It's a brilliant tactic, and he's destroying her, and it's humorous that all these people are trying to reframe it as if he's not because they all want to pretend like the topic is so off limits. So that would be my first one. I got more, but I'll hand it back to you.
Well, the reason he's attacking her is because, as you pointed out earlier, she is the embodiment of everything that's wrong with the system. I mean, like the fact that she can make herself and her family millions of dollars by mindlessly advocating for every single war whenever it comes up is a huge issue that is plaguing this nation. So, like, of course, it makes complete sense. And he's running against her, and he's running as an America First, I want to avoid World War III candidate. So why wouldn't he be going at the person who's actively trying to push us into World War III for her own personal profit?
Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
So when you say that, according to public choice, it can be useful to think of government officials and bureaucrats in a particular way, to think of them in a way as being like, maybe I'm misstating this, Tom, but like market actors in their own way, except instead of seeking profit in the form of dollars, they're seeking it in the form of votes?
Yeah, they act in their own self-interest, just like everybody else. And if you can't go too far astray if you operate by that assumption and not the assumption that they're angels they're only pursuing the public interest. And in government, there's no profit and loss statements. There are only budgets. And government bureaucrats, for example, are assumed to be budget maximizers. And every bureaucrat is an empire builder and a budget maximizer. And another way of looking at that is that they're cost maximizers. That's why there have been hundreds of studies comparing private and government provision of the same type of service, garbage collection, schools, you name it. And surprise, the government always is, many, many times more expensive. And public choice provides a pretty straightforward explanation, in that your typical government bureaucrat, to progress in his or her career, wants to have a bigger budget, a bigger staff, more perquisites, and so forth. And that's how they progress in their career and get a bigger and better job. And they tend to be cost maximizers, whereas an entrepreneur in the private sector is the opposite, is a cost minimizer, because that's how you maximize profit. Cost minimization is the flip side of profit maximization in any business. But it's just the opposite in government. Government tries to maximize cost, because they're playing with somebody else's money.
There's something called the Washington Monument Syndrome that when I learned about it, it taught me a lot about how government works, and it taught me about the need to be skeptical of various claims, particularly claims that the budget is just at rock bottom. We can't get by on this budget. The most urgent things now have to be cut. So if you could explain the Washington Monument Syndrome, I'd be grateful.
Yeah, the history of that was that in the 1960s, I believe it was 1965, the head of the National Park Service, who administers all the monuments, including the Washington Monument in D.C., wanted a bigger budget, and Congress didn't want to give him quite as big a budget as he wanted. And so he shut down the Washington Monument, the most popular tourist destination in Washington, D.C. So there were families taking their vacation, summer vacation, from every state who complained to their Congress people about this. We came all the way to Washington, D.C. Seeing the Washington Monument was number one on our list, things to do with the kids, and they closed it down. What's wrong with you? And so Congress was taught a lesson, and they forgot all about the budget cut or the budget reduction and gave the National Park Service the budget they wanted. And so that tactic has been known forever, seemingly, as the Washington Monument Syndrome. When I lived in Buffalo, New York for 1 year, I taught at State University of New York at Buffalo, right out of graduate school. And in the middle of the winter, they had several referenda on increasing the taxes for the public schools, and they had failed several times. The voters rejected it and voted no. And so in the middle of the winter, they said, okay, no more school buses. We can't afford school buses. And so in Buffalo, New York, it snows all day long every day, and there are no sidewalks. They just plow the snow, no sidewalks. So they basically were saying, we're gonna make your kids walk to school on the streets at 7 o'clock in the morning unless you give us what we want. And sure enough, they took another vote, and the vote passed. They'll quit garbage collection. They'll lay off police, ambulance services, all these things. I'll never admit that there's any room in the budget to be cut in any non-essential areas. They always go after the most painful things to the taxpayers, and that's the Washington Monument Syndrome.
I came across an example of this when I was writing one of my books like 10-ish years ago, and it involved the military. You'll be surprised to learn. And apparently the U.S. military had some kind of system in place, or was preparing such a system that would give them the earliest possible alert in case of a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. They would know about it instantly. At the same time, they also were spending $500 million a year on military marching bands. $500 million a year on military marching bands. So then they're all upset the budget isn't high enough. So which of these things you think they were slated to cut? The thing that's going to alert them about a Soviet invasion, or the military marching bands? The military marching bands were totally safe. Safest job in the military. They're never going to get rid of you, even though you are obviously the least necessary thing.
Yeah. Now, I used to own a condo near Rehoboth Beach, Delaware. It wasn't quite as fancy as Joe Biden's a big beach house paid for by some Ukrainian oligarch, apparently. But I'll never forget on the boardwalk at Bethany Beach, one evening, go over there, and the U.S. Air Force jazz band is performing, and everybody's having a good time. And I kind of very loudly said, why in the world does the Air Force have a jazz band? And I got all the dirty looks in the world, because, of course, this was the Washington establishment. That's where they go on vacation from D.C., Rehoboth Beach, in the summer. But yeah, that's one of the bigger boondoggles. Plenty of golf courses on military bases too, I understand.
The Peter Schiff Show. The other news item that came out today is that the government shutdown has been averted because Biden, I think a couple hours ago, signed this stopgap spending bill that passed the House. Even under the new leadership, it still passed the House. I mean, there was some opposition there from a few Republicans, libertarian-minded, fiscally responsible. There's a handful of those there, although they didn't really do much when Trump was president, but they're trying now. But they get outnumbered, and so it went through the House, it went through the Senate, and of course Biden signed it. He's not going to not sign a bill that lets the government keep spending money. But what this does now is it postpones the hard choices, which of course will never get made, but it postpones an actual budget till next year. So the congressmen, everybody can go home and enjoy their holiday without having to worry about voting for additional spending. I would much rather have a shutdown. Everybody says, oh, we can't shut down the government. Well, I think if we shut down the government, that's better than having the economy shut down, because we failed to shut down the government. The biggest problem in the economy is the government itself and all the spending. And shutting it down is part of the solution. But nobody wants to do that. And of course, if there really was a shutdown, it would actually be a little bit more popular. Because, every time we've shut the government down, it hasn't really shut down. I mean, everybody still has to pay their taxes. It's not like, when the government is shut down, they stop taking taxes out of your pay. Because if that was the case, everybody would be rooting for a shutdown and nobody would ever want the government to reopen. Problem is the government shuts down, but we still have to pay for it. Our taxes are the same whether the government is open or closed, right? That's part of the problem, right? We have to pay for the services. What the government will do during a shutdown is they'll make a big deal. They'll close the national park. And then they'll show people showing up at a national park with the little kids and they can't get in because the government is shut down. But the irony of that is whenever they shut down a national park, they have to send in government workers to keep people out because it's shut down. They always have more government workers at the national parks when they're shut down to keep people out than they have when it's open to let them in. So if they can afford to send all these people to the national parks to make sure no one gets in, then they can afford to have fewer people there to let them in and take the tickets. It's all a big show. They're trying to convince the public that, oh, this is terrible. We need to get the government back in business. But they're always in business. They never actually shut down. That is the problem. Now, some government workers don't have to show up. They love it. It's a paid holiday, right? The government workers, because they get to stay home and collect their checks. None of these government workers lose out on a nickel of their pay during the shutdown. They all get their money. Some of them might get it late, but everybody gets paid, so the taxpayer gets stuck with that. I mean, if we had a government shutdown where they said, okay, the government shut down, nobody has to pay any taxes, and we're not paying any money, that'd be better. So the problem is we don't get a real shutdown, we get a fake shutdown. But a real shutdown would be better than continuing on our present course, because our present course leads us to disaster. It leads us to a complete economic, financial crisis, a sovereign debt and currency crisis. And it would be worth averting that crisis to shut down the government. Because believe me, if we have a collapse of the dollar, the government is basically shut down. Because when the money that they print doesn't have any value, what can it do, right? What good is it? You have a printing press, you can print this money, but nobody wants it because it doesn't buy anything. Well, you've effectively shut yourself down, right? Because your checks don't have any purchasing power. So we're going to have a government shutdown one way or another. It's better to shut it down on our terms and then deal with the problems than to let the market shut it down with a dollar crisis. Now, a lot of people think that these boom and bust cycles are somehow, just inevitable. They're just part of the free market. We just have to suck it up and bear it. It's like one of the costs of capitalism, that there's inherent booms and busts. And that's not true. It's government interference in capitalism, government manipulation, particularly with interest rates, that causes this so-called business cycle. If you take government out of the equation and have sound money and have free markets, you're not really going to see these booms and busts. So it's government that is responsible, not the free market. And an analogy that my dad used, told me a long, long time ago, and I put it in my first book just to explain it. And he said, look, imagine that you would run a restaurant and then a circus comes to town. So a circus would come to town and then, all these extra people, were there. In a small town, a circus comes in and you have, all the entertainers that are there, come into town. And so now there's all these extra people. And let's say all the people in the circus, while they're in town, they start eating out at my restaurant. And now all of a sudden, my restaurant is really busy. I've got a lot more people at my restaurant than I normally have. It's crowded. Maybe people are waiting, outside for a table. And so I look at this and I misinterpret these signals. Maybe I don't even realize that the circus is in town. I just see a lot of people, at my restaurant. I'm like, wow, this is great. My restaurant's really popular. I need to expand. And so maybe I rent some extra space. Maybe there's some space next door, and so I expand my restaurant so I can put in more tables. I hire some more waiters or people to handle this big increase in my business. So I do all this stuff. I make these investments. I hire people, and everything is good. And then the circus leaves. They pull up their stakes and they pack everything up, and they go to the next town. Well, now what happens? It's a bust. My restaurant is empty now, right? The customers are gone. And so now I realize, I screwed up, and so what do I got to do? I got to try to get rid of the extra space that I took out. I got to lay off some workers that I never should have hired because my decisions were influenced by the circus that distorted stuff. Well, that's what happens with the Fed. The Fed artificially lowers interest rates, and that sends out false signals. Like the circus sent out false signals that there was more demand for my restaurant. No, there really wasn't more demand. It was just temporary. And so interest rates are low, and businesses start to do things based on these low interest rates. And then interest rates aren't low anymore. The Fed can't keep them down indefinitely. Eventually, they have to go up. And now, the people that you might have hired, you need to fire him. A lot of stuff has to be reversed because it's unsupported by the actual term structure of money and time preferences. The signals that a free market would have sent were short-circuited by the government.
But let's kick this off with a little strategy from Thomas Jefferson. Today in history, November 17th, 1798, the day after the resolutions that he drafted for Kentucky in response to the Alien and Sedition Acts, the day after they were signed, he fired off a letter to James Madison, who we know was working on similar resolutions for Virginia. And he said this: "I enclose you a copy of the draft of the Kentucky Resolves. I think we should distinctly affirm all the important principles they contain so as to hold to that ground in the future, and leave the matter in such a train as that we may not be committed absolutely to push the matter to extremities, and yet may be free to push as far as events will render prudent." And yet may be free to push as far as events will render prudent. I think that really deserves a second take because it's so essential to Thomas Jefferson to do a 1-2 punch. That is, you have your ultimate principles, but you also recognize that you're not going to get from where you are today to where you want to be in one fell swoop. And some of the principles that he was talking about, what he's mentioning in regards to those Kentucky resolutions of 1798 include these: an act outside the Constitution is void, but it doesn't turn into void in practice on its own. And submitting to unconstitutional acts and waiting for the feds to tell us if the feds violated the Constitution is really what helps establish a system of unlimited power. So for Thomas Jefferson, a nullification of the act is the rightful remedy. It's not something to wait 2 or 4 or 6 years for, to try down the line or after everything else is tried and failed, but the rightful remedy whensoever, as he put it, the general government assumes undelegated powers. Now, at the same time, we have to also recognize, based on Jefferson's strategic advice, that nullifying major parts of the largest empire ever is going to take a lot of work. It's going to take a lot of patience and a lot of steps to get there. So putting that all into practice, here are my top 4 to nullify for 2024 to get us on a real path to liberty. Number 1 is the central bank, the Federal Reserve. The Fed is the engine that powers the biggest government in history, but it's not going to end itself. Here from Hunter Hastings, an old article over at the Mises Institute. Hunter's a friend. He does great work. He said, "This institutionally independent but politically directed central bank spearheads a process that enables largely unlimited government spending. It expands credit and enables fiat money, which is produced without practical limitation." Hunter goes on. He says, "Fiat money enables government to issue debt, which, at least so far, also has been pursued without restraint." So far, it keeps getting worse. "The unlimited government debt enables unrestrained growth in government spending. So as long as they can keep this cycle going, government will never, ever, ever slow down its pace of growth. It'll just keep getting worse and worse and worse." And Hunter goes on. He says, "Thus, the state is set free from having to collect tax revenue before it can spend. And as Mises explained in such a case, there is no limitation on government at all." I'm sorry for the long quotes here, but I thought this was really interesting. Here's how Mises put it. "The government has but one source of revenue, taxes. No taxation is legal without parliamentary consent. But if the government has other sources of income, it can free itself from this control." So by using inflation, the money printer, the Federal Reserve, it's able to generate more loot for itself, even though it causes everything to cost more for us. It's what Ron Paul and many others have referred to as an inflation tax. Some of the founders called it that as well. They recognize that depreciating of paper money acts as a tax, especially on the poor. The number of federal gun control measures that are authorized under the Constitution is 0. That includes the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 1968, its amendments in 1986, the bump stock ban in 2018, of course, the Undetectable Firearms Act in 1988, and everything that they've passed or basically tried to shove down our throats in recent years, and anything that may come along in the future as well. 0 is the number of federal gun control measures that are authorized under the Constitution. St. George Tucker tells us the importance of the right to keep and bear arms, the right of self-defense. And that's why it's so high on my, and this is not in any particular order. Maybe it is. Maybe it would change around next time I do it. But St. George Tucker tells us why this is so important. In view of the Constitution of the United States, he said, "This may be considered as the true palladium of liberty. The right of self-defense is the first law of nature. In most governments, it has been the study of rulers to confine this right within the narrowest limits possible.
Governments do not like it when the population can defend itself. That's a huge problem for them, because how can they ever completely oppress you if you can fight back? And of course, when you combine that with large, permanent standing armies, which the entire founding generation absolutely despised, even if they thought smaller ones were necessary from time to time, they did not like military establishments like we have today. And Tucker continued. He said, wherever standing armies are kept up, and when the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction. And if liberty has not already been annihilated today, it certainly is on the brink of destruction, despite the fact that we're still able to exercise some rights. But really, we're in a state of luck, because government claims the power to shut down whatever they want under some kind of imaginary emergency clause in the Constitution, which I guess I could cover in another episode. Now, people need to learn how to exercise their rights, and this is probably the most important part, the most important essential step to nullify federal gun control, is that people need to learn how to exercise their rights, whether the government wants them to or not, whether government gives them a permission slip or not, whether the federal courts tell them they can or not. Liberty is about being free, whether the government approves of it or not. And that's how Thomas Jefferson put it as well. He said, a free people claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift of their chief magistrate.
Empires always fail, and the prime reason, if you want to just break it down, is, we as human beings, we never see the whole picture. We can't. We only see fragments, every single one of us, and we're all, governments are made up of people. So that's why empires and countries that, world governments, they always fail, because they could never see the whole picture. Always, 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 there are things that they can't possibly anticipate that wrecks their schemes, that throws monkey wrenches in their schemes, and everything falls apart. Now, I don't know how many people, the younger generations, what they know about the Soviet Union, but that was set up to be a world government. They had the Comintern and all that, and that was their goal, to be the government of the world, the Soviet Union. Of course, it was a total economic basket case. They went bust, and after they fell, America, our country, had the golden opportunity to be the beacon of the free world, the bastion of freedom, and they blew it. Instead, the Soviets fell, and America, or our politicians said, we'll be the world government. We're going to go out and go, with all these endless wars. Now, it's not going to be communist, where the state owns everything. It's going to be corporatists, where you have the state married to the big corporations. That's what we've been living through. And like the Soviets, we too are reaching the end of our rope and heading for bankruptcy with debts that will never be paid. And now the interest is starting to creep up to $1 trillion per year, as Dr. Paul and I covered last week. Ultimately, we all know, everybody who has credit cards, once you can't service your debt, forget about paying it off. Once you can't even service it, it's game over for you. And unfortunately, our country took this turn, and it's inevitable that they're going to go the way of the Soviets and everyone else.
Sometimes we heard 10, 15 years ago, the deficit's out of control and bad things are going to happen. Bad things did happen, but sometimes the recovery and the trust was restored to the fiat money. And yet inevitably the policies that we have and the monetary system we have, we can expect that continuation. But I'm going to quickly go over a couple of these headlines that I think helps us make our point, Chris. The first one I have here, and I don't have them in the order of the significance and the importance. So the first one I have is House votes to avoid government shutdown, but no Ukraine, Israel aid. Well, no aid, that's good. But I tell you what, there's going to be aid, and it's going to happen. It'll come later. The problems are still there. And it's just that politically it was very necessary to make sure that there was no lockdown, shutdown of the government. So that has been taken care of. And another one here is on the Pentagon. We really don't audit the Pentagon. They're like the Fed. They get away with it, but they go through pretense of it. So they've done it now 6 in a row, and every one of them has failed. No surprise here. Pentagon fails 6 audits in a row. That means nobody knows. Everybody knows about the money that was wasted on all the wars, essentially, that we go to. Just think of, Afghanistan and what's going on still in Iraq and what's going on in Ukraine and all the evidence of this, because it's not well spent.
It only takes a small minority of people to prevail. Our founders were a small group of, boy, were they smart. Now not smart enough to create the perfect system, because that can't be created. But boy, what they did create was amazing and shook the entire world. Good begins with a tiny, but committed group of people, just as the bad ideas do. So we live in a world where it's a battle between good and bad ideas. And we may be in the minority today, but who knows in 100 years what the world looks like. When Dr. Paul started, the group of people that believed in the ideas that he's talking about was much, much smaller than it is today. And today we have the internet, and we have we have tools that were never available before to reach so many people. So we all have a mouth, and we all have keyboards and a phone and a computer screen. We have to use it, and our small group may someday surprise the world.
Very good. I'm going to mention a couple points on the reason why I think we shouldn't give up. We should keep plugging away, but be realistic, because we know what it's been like for thousands of years and what the conditions are among human beings, that there are times that seem to continue, that there are conflicts. But there are also times when you see spurts, tremendous positive spurts of the concept of liberty. Certainly the Enlightenment, along with our revolution in this country and our Constitution, was very, very positive. So with all these problems I described, I think that we only should hone in on a couple principles that would take care of this. The one that libertarians share and many others do, because it's part of religious belief for people, that you give up the issue of aggression. You don't decide, well, if you have an argument in Congress, what you have to do is see who's the most aggressive and gets knocked out, first. You can't use aggression to reorient the whole society, people. And that's what we see all the time. Just think of the law breaking that goes on. That right now, most of it is not even being punished at all. So if people should, on principle, give up the idea of aggression. The non-aggression principle would go a long way. And if everybody followed it, there'd be a lot more peace and a lot more prosperity. Governments can't do anything more than you as an individual can do. You can't steal, you can't kill, and we shouldn't allow our governments to get away with doing it either. So I think the other major principle that makes this thing work is that the argument now is big on rights. How do you have a right? Well, the big difference for me and my understanding is we have too much collectivism, too many groups, this group, this group, this group. You're discriminating against that group, that group. I don't like that at all. Individuals have rights. And it should be that because they belong in a group, they never can get a benefit and they can't get a punishment. They can't have abuse. And right now, everything is done in groups. And it sort of annoys me on election night. How did so-and-so group vote? Well, I think individuals vote, and I understand the politics of saying, putting people in group and thinking about it. But no, everything should be individual rights. There is no such thing in a free society as collective rights. And I would like to go ahead and close today by thanking all our people for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.